Hi and welcome back to the second video in everything I know about chronic insomnia. In this video I just want to look at how we got to this stage. Now this is not by any stretch intended to be sort of like getting down on yourself, listing out all the reasons, all the things you've done wrong in inverted quotes and all that stuff. But it is important to understand what the journey here was, because if we know what that was, we know then what it looks like to potentially undo it. We know what we're tackling. So if you're in a position of, I have no idea how this has happened and what I've done to deserve this, that's a very pejorative word. It's not a really helpful word, deserving. There isn't deserving involved in this. But if you're wondering what the journey has been to this point and you kind of feel like it just kind of crept up on you, or maybe you do have some idea of what's been causing this, but it is helpful, I think, just to get that down and go through what those factors are. And again, as I say, this then gives us an insight into the kind of things we're going to tackle. But the first thing in this, and the most important thing, is to not blame yourself. Really, you mustn't blame yourself. As you can see here, I kind of start this slide with it and end it as well, just to reinforce it. One of the best bits of wisdom I ever found was that you are always doing the best you can, even if you're doing something that on later reflection proves to have been unhelpful or unhealthy, or done in anger or something, or you're eating comfort food or something that we can kind of agree that is objectively not a good thing. In that moment that you're doing it, you are always doing what you need to do. You're doing the best you can. Now, it doesn't make it the smartest choice, but it does allow you to get away from blaming yourself. So when we go through this list, it doesn't mean, oh my God, I've been so stupid. I can't believe I let myself do these things that have led to this point, because there was reasons that these things happened. And the reasons for those things will depend on what was happening in your life. So for example, a common thing with insomnia is people resort to alcohol to try to get themselves to sleep. But actually, as we'll see later, alcohol is it does help initially, but then as your tolerance grows to it, it can actually be something that exacerbates poor sleep. But the reason you went to alcohol in the first place was to give yourself some respite. So that's what I mean by don't blame yourself. So yes, objectively looked at for a bird's eye view, they may not be good things, some of these, but you always do the best you can just to get through the current moment. So don't blame yourself. Now, in many ways, as I mentioned in the intro, insomnia is the modern disease. You really don't find a great deal of incidents of insomnia as you go further back in history. Now, that isn't to say nobody ever had difficulty sleeping. Obviously, we're all different. There are light sleepers out there. I'm sure there was a great many reasons in history why people would have not slept, but I think we live in the worst possible time for it. And we're going to get into that a bit later in terms of what that looks like and the reasons for that. But briefly, it comes down to the shape of the world we live in terms of people's working patterns, in terms of the proliferation of the internet, just how data driven everything is. We are more connected to devices than ever. There are more mental health pressures than ever there were before, for the most part. And there's a set of very modern challenges that I think translate to increased depression, anxiety, insomnia, a lot of mental health conditions like those. You probably know people who have suffered with anxiety or depression. Maybe you have yourself. And again, this is something that is just absolutely skyrocketing in the modern age for some of the reasons I described. And so this is creeping up on us, insomnia. This is partly why the medical establishment is not really that helpful with it right now. As I said earlier, you may have found that it wasn't very receptive when you went to see your doctor or something. But the good news with that is, if we accept that it is a modern disease and it's been caused by the accelerating pace of life, the constantly connected to the internet and all these things and others, then that means we can undo that and we can row back from it. So it is within your control, and that's a message I want to sort of keep reinforcing as we go through this. Now, it's pretty hard to get anywhere with insomnia or any mental challenges without somebody telling you about the fight, flight, or freeze response, commonly truncated to fight or flight. Now, this is the brain's natural response to threats. Okay, we inherited this from the very earliest days, the part of our brain called the amygdala that we still have from our days as lizards before we evolved, all those millions of years ago. And it's really, really, really primitive. For all our sophistication as humans, or supposed sophistication, the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism is really basic because it has a really important job to do and it can't really deal with complication. And that job is, in the face of a threat, do you fight, flight, or freeze? So fight is self-explanatory. Flight would mean running away, and freeze is just stop still and maybe play dead or something. The problem is that this happens in response to threats that are both real and perceived. And if it's happening to perceived threats, that's not very helpful. Okay, so if the classic example is if a wild tiger comes into your house, that's when this response is really necessary. Okay, you're going to forget everything you're doing and you will go into autopilot and do one of those three things. Probably run away. I wouldn't recommend fighting any big cats. You're going to have much worse problems than insomnia if you try that. But the problem with this is, as I say, is that the amygdala doesn't differentiate between real and perceived threats. So you see this with all kinds of fears that people have, So, if someone has a fear of flying, it doesn't matter that, 99.999% of planes land without issue and don't crash. So you could say, well, okay, there's an irrationality there, but as I say, the amygdala really doesn't deal with that kind of thing, like rationality, statistics. If there's a threat, it's going to do with that. Now, what that means for us is we are terrified of sleep and we're terrified of nighttime. And if you get to the stage of chronic insomnia, really what you're having to do is retrain yourself to sleep the way that you did when you were a baby. And that's really important, by the way, if I hadn't mentioned that so far. You can sleep, you do sleep, and you always could sleep. You were born with the ability to sleep. There isn't an organism on earth that doesn't sleep. You did it as a baby. All that's happened is we've adopted some practices and got grown up in a society that is making it harder to do that. And that's really important to remember. You are not broken. You can sleep. But yeah, these threats that we fight, flight, and freeze in the face of, they can be perceived and imaginary. So you can be terrified of the nighttime, and we build it up. Then it becomes like a snowball effect. So what for some people is, well, I just had a bad night, I'll have a better one tomorrow. At some point, we actually took it way beyond that and developed it into a big problem. And then that kind of snowball, as I say, and then this invented threat of the nighttime, of the bedroom, whatever specific aspect of it is that terrifies you, then triggers that fight, flight, or freeze response, which is not helpful. Because when you have fight, flight, or freeze, although helpful in the face of real threats like the tiger, it releases cortisol and adrenaline, I believe, don't quote me, but certainly cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And you become in a sort of a heightened state of arousal and stimulation, which is obviously the opposite of what we're trying to do if we're trying to go to bed. And I know what that's like. I've laid there just shaking, utterly terrified. So that's the kind of thing that's got us to this point as well. And related to that, we have the reinforcement of unhelpful thoughts, So you've probably been telling yourself things like you're broken, you're physiologically broken, you're somehow different from everybody else, you're wired differently. You'll have your own terminology for this. I tended to talk about being broken physiologically a lot. That was what I kept coming up with. You can't sleep, you can't go on holiday, you can't plan for things like other people can, like normal people, in inverted commas. and these just get reinforced. And there's a very strong line in psychology that says that you basically become what you tell yourself. So, just as you can reinforce things positively and say that you're getting stronger at something, you're going to be good at something, you're going to win that football match, that tennis match, or whatever. There's undoubted qualities to psychology in that regard, for like reinforcing positive mantras and things. It works exactly the same the other way. So you kind of get what you put in. If you tell yourself that you're something, well, guess what? Your brain is listening, and it kind of gives you what you're telling it it's going to do. So when we have these unhelpful thoughts, what you're doing is you're releasing a catharsis. You're that unhappy. You're that just absolutely, rock bottom and angry. And again, I know what that feels like. I've been that person who is getting up in the morning, having been awake all night, grabbing my pillow and just whacking my wardrobe with it and knocking things flying, punching cushions and things. You're doing that as a catharsis to release something. And that goes back to what I said at the start of this slide. You're doing the best you can. And in that moment, maybe you had to release that anger and say those negative things and swear at yourself, whatever it is. But just be careful that you are reinforcing negative thoughts about yourself. And then, onto that next point is kind of what we just talked about, you have a malleable brain. It will respond to the thoughts that you give it. You are what you believe. We've all heard that a million times, but it's true in the negative just as it is in the positive. You are what you believe and what you tell yourself. How often have we seen people who have, mental problems with how they look or something, or they have a deep hatred of their appearance, and you look at them and you're like, well, you're gorgeous, you're beautiful, what's wrong with you? But these are the thoughts that have been fed to them. They probably didn't originate with the person. Maybe they had some trauma early on, but they've been reinforced over the years, and you just can't tell them that they're wrong and that they're beautiful because their brain is so used to believing what's being said to it. The next one is really important, and this is where we're going to start getting into areas which are beyond the simple fact of being unable to sleep. I mentioned in the first video that insomnia is invariably a symptom of something else. It is not in itself an original problem. It's something else manifesting as insomnia. And these things can manifest in different ways for different people, but for you or for us, it's manifesting as insomnia. And that is an invitation. I said in the first video that insomnia is an opportunity, and that opportunity is largely about resolving unresolved traumas. Now, maybe that's going to come as a surprise to you, or maybe you're already kind of in touch with that, some of the traumas you have in your life, maybe recently, maybe long ago, but part of this work is going to be encouraging you to look at those traumas that have happened in your life and start to work through them and see how you can do that. Now, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, but I have been through some of this myself. I'm going to recommend some books later on to help you revisit some of these things that may be holding you back. Now, these traumas could be very well buried. We're very good at suppressing pain, suppressing trauma. I've had a set of things in my life that have led to a lot of trauma, which is probably responsible for my incidence of insomnia. And it took me a long time because I didn't want to make the connection between insomnia and traumas, because who wants to open Pandora's box, right? And look at all these terrible things that have happened to us in the past or something that we've kind of got used to burying, and it's the last thing you want to be doing in some ways. But eventually I did, and I started working through some books and talking to therapists and things, and starting to come to terms with and release some of the resentments and anger from some of the traumas that I went through from in my case, it was way back to my school days, and related to people close to me and things. But that's something we're going to come to later. So that's another reason that we are where we are. It's arguably the biggest reason. If you feel you don't have any unresolved trauma and you still have insomnia, well, okay, either you do but you're not aware of it, or you've buried it so well that you've just start to come to believe that you don't have any trauma. All that's true, and you have insomnia for different reasons, but it's a really important one to consider at that point. Finally in this list is poor lifestyle choices. Now again, don't blame yourself, okay? We all make choices which, as I said, objectively they might not stand up to scrutiny as being really good choices, but at the time they helped us through something, whatever it is, whether it's smoking, drinking, comfort eating, anything. But we are going to look at lifestyle choices that are contributing to insomnia, and and how changing those can have a huge impact on your life. Again, some will apply more to some people than other people, so your mileage may vary. But that's the other big area that's kind of got us where we are. And just to finish up with repeating that first point, don't blame yourself. I can't say that enough. This is about understanding how we got to this point. It isn't about how terrible you've been, or how oh, stupid me doing all these terrible things, like giving myself unhelpful thoughts, or not dealing with my traumas and things. Oh, how stupid am I? No, it's not about any of that. It's about just coming to terms with it, because from that point we can then move forward, and that's the idea of this slide. So I will see you in the next video.